Well, hello, we're going to talk about Chapter 3, and this will be the first of two parts for this chapter. Uh, just as the same with Chapters 1 and 2, lots of information packed in here, so we're going to try to go pretty quickly, and I think we need two videos to kind of be able to cover everything, because again, it's about 60 slides total for this chapter, so I'm going to try to get through about 40 of those slides in the next few minutes. So the first chapter here, first lesson in this chapter is about the Earth's population. And I think a lot of the themes of this are very similar to some of the activities that we've done in class talking about water. There's some kind of interconnection there. So you can see our learning targets here, and we're just going to jump right in with next slide. So the Earth's population has changed a lot, and it's increasing a lot in size. You will see over here, this is a cool animation. I encourage you to access this later on through the notes. I know you can't really access it here, but it shows just the progression as a timeline throughout history and how the population has steadily increased and how that's still happening. Right now there's about 7.5 billion people that live on Earth here in 2020, and that's projected to be like 9 billion, even maybe in the next 15 years or so. But the population hasn't always been there. If you can kind of see here, this is around, it was 182 million. Is that like 600 AD, something like that? So, I mean, a billion is 1,000 million. So population has increased a lot. I think in our water activity that we did last week, it said that there were 2.5 billion people, or it was 3.5 billion people in 1950 on Earth. So the fact that the population has about doubled in 70 years is, kind of concerning, and that's what some of this is going to kind of deal with. So why are those things happening? Well, the death rate is falling because of healthcare, because of knowledge of what causes disease, of what it takes to be healthy. The death rate's falling, which is a good thing, right? Like people are living longer. The birth rate is higher. Standard of living in a lot of places, especially like the United States and Europe, it's higher, and so we can support larger families. And so that's part of it. So we've got the death rate is falling. The birth rate has become a little bit more in check. It's actually decreasing slowly. But yeah, the tendency is that the population is rising. And keep in mind that we don't have any more resources than what we have land for and water for. So we're starting to stress some of those areas out. And that's a lot of what this deals with in this chapter. So, like I said, the global rate of growth is decreasing, and by 2050, the United States Department of Economic and Social Affairs predicts that the world's population will peak at 9 billion. So, it's supposed to hopefully decrease some, that we're not going to, it's going to peak at that point. Not that we want, a lot of people to go away, but just the Earth cannot only sustain so much, right? There's only so much room in an elevator. There's only so much room in your bedroom, right? Like you can't just have 50 people living in your bedroom. There's just not room for that, right? So it's just not sustainable to have that population. And we're probably going to do an activity related to a population pyramid. And just so you can see where it breaks down by age, the number of males and females, and that can tell us something. So as certain shapes tell us something, we expect there to be less people at these older ages, right? Not everybody lives to be 85 plus years old. But when we see a decrease down here, that these numbers are really, really low, that's concerning because that means babies are not surviving under the age of 5, into those first years of life. So the difference between a really stable population it is represented in certain ways, and then populations that are not very stable are represented differently. So we're going to do an activity kind of related to that in a population pyramid, and you'll know how to read those more effectively. So obviously this growth is really concerning, especially it talks about like disease can spread more easily. I mean, think about like the coronavirus, major urban areas, that's where we're going to see that more, more heavily at work in those areas. Pollution's increasing in those large cities. Crime can increase. There may not be enough work for everybody, so there may be unemployment. There may be an increase in mining. We use a lot of our mining here to get coal, and that coal is then used to power plants that produces energy. So we're using up fossil fuels. We have to cut down forests to make room for farming. There's just the list goes on and on that can happen because of this population growth. There just may not be enough energy, so learning to use solar panels and other natural forms of energy can be super helpful there too as well. So population distribution isn't always even. I mean, we live kind of close to a town, but there are much, much bigger cities out there. So people may have to live in those cities because that's where they can find work. It may be a religious significance, a government center. There's a lot of reasons that people could be attracted to living in certain areas, and that makes that population grow more. And so that brings us to population density, which is like calculated by the number of people living in an area divided by the size of the area, the square area of that area. Saying the word area a lot there. And so urban areas are going to have a much higher population density because people are packed in much tighter. Rural areas, country areas, where people are spread out more, lower population density. The map here on the right kind of shows population density in South Africa. So those areas that are darker in color, so we get to purple, that's where you're going to see more of that higher population. Urban areas are densely populated, rural areas are not. It's more like the countryside. So this is a picture of a countryside. Hopefully all those places have the basic needs of that. I like that it says that only 30% of the Earth's surface is land. We learned that in the water activity that we did, and only 15% of that is really habitable. It's going to be affected by deserts, may not be very livable. Antarctica is not a place that people can really live, because it's too cold and doesn't have those resources. People migrate for a lot of different reasons, to find work, because of cultural reasons. So population shift based on immigration, obviously. So those things are constantly at work there. So there are push and pull factors. Our push factors are things causing people to want to leave area. Maybe they're a refugee, so they're escaping because of war and violence. Maybe they're being persecuted. Think back to learning about the Jews in Germany and other places where they were sent to concentration camps. Many of them were trying to leave because they were being persecuted for their religious and ethnic background. So that still happens in the world today in places, and people often try to leave because of that. It could be natural disasters. It could be just the lack of jobs that exist. So people are being pushed out of certain areas because of that. But then we're pulled because of better jobs, better education. They said the United States is a land of opportunity. So many immigrants try to come here seeking a better life than maybe they get in their country. But there's many people that are going other places as well besides the United States. Another video you can check out here later on. I know I breezed over those, but they're always really good information to kind of catch in that. So effects on immigration is the blending of cultures. I mean, really, the United States is a perfect example of this. We are a blend of European, Native American, African cultures. I mean, it's all blends together. No one can really say that they are just American, right? Like, we are a blending of cultures. But there's other areas where we see that too, maybe more so in even urban areas where some of those cultures really take root, and you can kind of see that there's those connections back to culture. So urbanization is the growing of cities larger and larger. Look at this picture here. We can see a really large city, and the largest cities are called megalopolises, just a cluster of city like one to another. We will kind of talk places in the world that deal with that. So that's the end of chapter 1. Just kind of think through these questions. We're going to go ahead and try to do a good portion of chapter 2, or section 2 of this chapter as well. And then we'll save lesson 3 for the final video. So this is just kind of a good overview. I think a lot of these terms are going to be very familiar to you. Culture is a set of beliefs, can be a lot of components to culture, but there are 8 cultural traits that we're going to kind of lay out in this presentation. So, and you can see them all there. I'm going to kind of break them down each individually. You will need to know these, and this is really where it defines what we'll talk about in social studies when we cover an area. So a social group is a group, that could be made up of, for a lot of different reasons. Social groups, you're a part of social groups like sports that you play here at the school. So even like I work here at the school, so that's part of one of the social groups I'm in. But an ethnic group is a group that united because of more like racial or national or tribal beliefs and backgrounds. So we're all in a variety of those groups. Language, we have to have some sort of language that unites us. And sometimes we have multiple languages that people speak. And so we could have regional languages, which is more like a dialect. One of my favorite things when we cover China, we'll learn about like the different dialects. And so two people may speak Chinese but not be able to understand each other because of the different dialects. Pretty fascinating stuff. And we got a thing here about Moana, just because that movie was very much trying to show kind of like the Polynesian and South Pacific cultures in that, and some of the languages and word choices in that movie. Religion is a major part of culture. So different religious beliefs, and there's different degrees of following a certain religion. Some people are, more follow it because of the holidays and traditions, and it's more of a heritage thing. And then some people, it's much more of following after the certain beliefs, following a god or whatever it might be. So there's a slide here. These are kind of the 5 major religions that we're going to cover. I don't want to spend too much time talking about these because when we cover the cultural area that these religions come from, so for example, Christianity and Islam and Judaism, kind of all in the Middle East, is where they came from. And then Buddhism is more of an Eastern religion, and so is Hinduism. So we'll kind of talk about more of those as we go. But these are kind of a good kind of framework of who the leader is and what some of those central beliefs are, is a good idea. We have custom, so you can see shaking of hands is a custom. Some countries kiss on both cheeks. We have bowing that takes place, and different, like maybe you didn't know this, but different bows would be given to different, even the kind of status of a person. So the deeper the bow, you'd go deeper into that. So little cultural things that we may not be aware of. History is a major component. I think in some ways maybe that's people that don't like social studies really get kind of caught up on. It's just a bunch of dead people and facts and all that. But we learn because these people were living people, and we learn from their stories. And much of our stories is affected by what things were. So we see a picture here, of government long ago. I think this is probably the founding fathers of the U.S., and that affects our own history. So learning history shouldn't be some dry, boring thing. It should be something that kind of tells us something about where we've come from. Arts and sports are a part of that. I mean, sports history is even the history component, but we stay active, and that's a part of our culture as well. Government will be a major component too, and all the practices of government, how it's set up. There are different types of government. I'm going to skip past this slide because there's a chart that kind of lays this out, but we really have a democracy, a monarchy, and dictatorships are kind of the 3 big ones. There's kind of some videos that deal with each one of those and how they're different from each other. There's also this chart here. We'll talk more about this later on, but a democracy there's different types of democracies, but more or less it's kind of like government by the people, or government is established because people vote in elections. A monarchy is where there's a ruler that's often, it's passed down from generation to generation, like in England. People aren't choosing their leader. It's more happening because of a family in power. And a dictatorship is really where someone comes in and seizes control and maintains the control, not because they were elected, not because the people are in support of that, but because they've taken control, often usually using the military. So usually dictatorships are kind of one of those things that are kind of frowned upon. We'll talk about North Korea later on, a dictatorship that's existed there, and some other ones that have existed. But obviously the United States has a democracy because we elect our leaders, and they are appointed that way. Economy is a major part. That's what the 3rd lesson is going to kind of deal mainly with the economy. There's different types: command, market, mixed, and traditional, and they're all slightly different from each other. We won't go into that too much in detail now. And then we have regions. We've already talked about that's one of the 5 themes of geography. Splitting places up into region helps us to understand them better. just kind of look and see if there's anything else I want to hit here. Globalization can have both positive and negative effects to it. Positive effects becoming more understanding, accepting of cultures. I feel like that's a lot of what I want to cover in this class. But then there's also tension and conflicts that exist because of globalization, more cultures coming into contact with each other. And I think that does it. So I know that was a little bit long, but we're going to do this third lesson in a separate video. That way we can kind of stop one and we'll end with that. So big things, population increase, and then these 8 themes of culture.